Hey YouTube, it's your history teacher, Mr. Terry, back with another History Teacher Reacts video. And today we are hitting up part 2 of the little two-part series on the biggest cities of all time by Atlas Pro. So we did part 1, that was voted on by our awesome patron pledgers, and I got enough feedback that you guys wanted to see me check out and comment on part 2. So we're going to do that here today. Hey, before we get going, I wanted to make you aware we got a brand new Teespring design for some great merch. Shirts, hoodies, you can even get a mask if you would like to. But yeah, we got a new one right over here. We're calling it Falling Empires, and it features Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany and Franz Joseph of Austria-Hungary in World War I. And you can check that out and click the link down below to the Teespring account. You can do that. We also relaunched the World War II Mario Kart themed shirt. That's still up there, and some other stuff if you're looking for some new gear to support your new school year or work, whatever it is. We got that for you. So check out that link down below. All right, and one other thing before we begin, the original video link is also down there. Make sure you click that, give that the view, like, subscribe, and all that stuff. And let's go ahead and get started.
Hey, before we start, this video is actually part 2, so you might want to check out part 1 before watching the rest of this if you haven't already. Just a suggestion. Starting where we left off, around the year 1 CE, Rome was the biggest city on Earth, with a population of just about 1 million people. As the Roman Empire expanded into new lands, it brought new people and wealth into the city, causing it to prosper for several hundred years. But soon, the city and the empire as a whole came to rely on this constant influx of wealth taken from distant lands, either in the form of taxes or plunder. This put the empire in a precarious position in which, if, for any reason, Rome stopped expanding, it would cease to prosper.
Yeah, I mean, that is a huge reason. Rome didn't fall in a day, although you might say it was the final emperor was unseated in 476 or whatever. But the way that Rome does their economy is not necessarily sustainable because it required constant expansion and looting of new lands to be able to fund itself. So it's a cycle because the more you conquer, the more you have to spend, and they rely on that money for their stability. So you always have to conquer, and you can only get stretched, so much relying on that kind of economic support that way. Now, something else to remember is Rome was one of the first cities to reach 1 million people. Alexandria was, they think, probably the first one to do that, which was before that. And it's important to remember that there's a reason why they were able to get to something like 1 million. It's not just because a lot of people move there, which is obvious, but sustaining a population of 1 million in a city, especially in ancient times, is an incredible task because you have to be able to make that a healthy, sustainable city. So, for example, what allowed Rome to be able to have a city 1 million was having the resources to be able to sustain that. So things like that, how they built the aqueducts, which was a technological marvel of getting water into their cities and a sewer system to get bad water and drainage out. So that's really hard to do. And so it's not like it's a lack of trying necessarily of cities before that not being able to be that big. It's not possible without, again, having starvation, famine, disease spread, all that kind of things. And Rome was able to handle that for a long time. But when Rome had fallen, by the time the Roman Empire had the Western Roman Empire had fallen, they probably were only at 10% of what their population was at its height. So it wasn't long-term sustainable.
It's like that myth that sharks need to keep swimming or they'll die. Rome stopped swimming around the year 285 CE. At this point, the empire had overextended itself, making it impossible to govern under a single central government. To combat this, Emperor Diocletian divided the empire into two halves, east and west, with Constantinople governing the east and Rome the west. This was the first major hit to Rome. Then,
what I like to say to my students is, Rome was too big to govern. Diocletian splitting it, the idea would be more efficient to govern. You'd have basically an administration running from Constantinople in the east and then one in the west with Rome. What I like to tell my students, though, is what Diocletian did with this was put a Band-Aid on a wound that needed surgery, right? It may have slowed things down. But one thing, and I don't think they really maybe fully realized this, was Eastern Rome was economically carrying Western Rome. A lot of the resource came out there, the trade routes coming from Asia, and what you saw very slowly from this, because the empire is not going to fall for almost another 200 years, but that the East was kind of growing while the West was decreasing slowly there. But I don't think they had realized how imbalanced East and West was to the economic sustainability of Rome when Diocletian split it. But again, put a Band-Aid on a wound that probably needed surgery. But think of it this way, I don't know what could have fixed Rome. So you could say they put a Band-Aid on a wound that needed surgery, but that technique for that surgery doesn't exist.
Soon afterwards, Germanic tribes began to flood in from the north. The Gothic Wars lasted from the year 376 to 382 and seriously weakened the Western Roman Empire.
Right.
In 402, the capital of the empire was switched from Rome to Ravenna, as it better connected with other parts of the empire. But that didn't stop the Visigoths from sacking Rome in 410. After this, the city was rebuilt, but in 455, the Vandals came and sacked the city for a second time. By this point, Rome's population had dropped to only about 450,000 people, less than half of what it once was. By 500 CE, 3 other cities were now in the running: Constantinople, the successor to Rome, Jiankang, the city that later became Nanjing, and Luoyang, what was once called Luoyi. All 3 of these cities contained around 500,000 people, though it can't be determined which one was on top. By 600 CE, however, as Rome continued to bleed its population, many fled to Constantinople, and its population climbed to the top spot with 600,000 people.
Okay. So when Western Rome fell, people started moving to East if they could, and that increased the population of Constantinople. I didn't know that specifically. That's good to know.
Short-lived, however, as in 582, Emperor
China's
Wen
exploding,
of the Sui dynasty in China settled on a new place to build his capital. This city, Chang'an, continued to be the capital even after the Tang dynasty took over, and by the year 700, Chang'an reached a population of over 1 million.
China exploded under the Tang dynasty. The Tang and Song dynasties are a couple of the big the real big post-classical societies, and one of that was agricultural production. And anytime where they become under real imperial rule, because China has a history of, you have imperial rule and then it breaks up and then it comes back again. And in these times of more control, there's more safety, so there's fewer wars. And then usually the government can oversee agricultural production, which raises population. And that's what you're seeing as an effect here.
The first city to do so since Rome, and became the biggest city in the world. In 755, however, the An Lushan rebellion started in China. Chang'an was sacked repeatedly during this time, and the population seriously declined
down,
as a
Song
result.
replaces it.
Only 7 years after the An Lushan rebellion began, in 762, the city of Baghdad was founded as the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, and by the year 900 CE had grown into a city of 900,000 people.
Baghdad becomes the intellectual center of the world too. And will be so for actually quite a while, up until the Mongols completely wipe it out. That's not for another 300 years. But the Abbasid Empire, they're right at the heart. Baghdad becomes a hub, as you can see geographically here, of Silk Road trade, which was connecting here. A lot of people kind of consider this like a golden age for the Silk Road, where the kind of on the Tang dynasty about now. And when the Abbasids came under control here, Islamic Empire here, that was good. And you don't think about Baghdad as being that kind of center now, but that's a story for later, because you can thank the Mongols for that one. They basically obliterate it in one of the most violent and destructive sieges we've ever seen in world history,
making it the largest city in the world at the time. Baghdad stayed in this top position for at least 300 years,
That's
roughly
crazy.
the same amount of time Rome was on top, and it reached its peak by around 1100 CE at 1.2 million people.
Wow.
During this time, the Dark Ages of Europe were in full swing, and China was enveloped in a series of internal conflicts, making Baghdad and the rest of the Middle East one of the most stable civilizations to be in at the time.
Yeah, the European Middle Ages, Europe doesn't get back to the population it was at the height of Rome for like a millennia. It takes a long time for them to ever get back to that.
The city of Baghdad in particular became a center of learning and was known throughout the world for its libraries. In 1258, the city was invaded by the Mongols, who massacred most of the city's inhabitants and left Baghdad in ruins. The Abbasid Caliphate...
at least the Mongols probably at least killed probably at least 250,000 civilians, pretty much. Sources coming out of Persia put that way higher. I've seen sources say the Mongols killed like a couple million people. That might be on the extreme side, but they obliterate it. Baghdad never recovers from it.
Crumbled, and Baghdad
the
lost
Abbasid
its
Empire
vital role in the region. In China, the southern Song dynasty shifted their capital to Hangzhou in 1132, right. And after Baghdad was invaded, this replaced it as the biggest city in the world. By 1276, Hangzhou had climbed to a population of 1.5 million, but 1276 was not a good year for Hangzhou.
Mongols!
This is also the year Mongols invaded and destroyed most of the city, much like what happened to Baghdad. Yeah, people sort of forget how brutal the Mongolians were. After this, power in China shifted to the city
toppled two major empires there, the Abbasids, so Persia, and toppled China. Amazing, within a generation.
Beijing, and almost immediately replaced Hangzhou as the top city with a little over 1 million people. In the year 1420, Beijing was declared the new capital of the Ming dynasty and underwent a period of rapid expansion. Many moved from Nanjing to Beijing, and by 1500, Beijing was the largest city in the world, also with a little over 1 million inhabitants. Beijing kept this title for a while too. Around the 1650s, Constantinople, now controlled by the Ottomans, had grown enough to challenge Beijing again, but that soon diminished.
Istanbul.
By 1700 CE,
it's now Istanbul.
In Thailand
by that
was extremely open to traders and attracted many people to its markets. This acted as an economic hub for the region, with some calling it the Venice of the East, and as a result had amassed a population of over 1 million too, and might have even briefly taken the place of Beijing on top. But in
Southeastern Asian history usually gets kind of, especially when you're studying Asian, which is such a broad term, cultures there, East Asian, because it gets overshadowed too often by Indian history, Chinese history, and then Japanese history. But Southeastern Asian history is so big, especially at this time, because of its connection in the Indian Ocean trade routes, which linked that whole half of the world.
1867, Burma and Siam fought a war with one another, and the Burmese army destroyed the city, causing the Siamese kingdom to crumble as well. So Beijing was more or less the biggest city in the world until around 1825, or for roughly 300 years, very similar to the reign of both Rome and Baghdad. The Chinese Empire at this time was still relatively stable, but the British Empire had seen rapid expansion and became the world's largest. Subsequently, this resulted in London surpassing Beijing when both cities had about 1.35 million inhabitants.
You have a big influence here, and I'm assuming they'll get to it. Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution changed agriculture and commerce in England and was really starting to take off now here in the 19th century. So it was definitely built upon the backs of that.
Each. From there, London only further distanced itself from all other cities, reaching 2 million before 1850, likely the first city to ever do so. 4 million by 1875, and
it's so, yeah, we've never seen
5 million.
Never seen urbanization like this before.
Now, if you're familiar with European history, you'll know what started at this
World War I.
On July 28, 1914, World War I began. This led to great damage to not only the London population, but the entire population of Britain and Europe as a whole. For years, huge waves of immigrants had fled the troubled continent of Europe to the New World, specifically to New York City. And by 1925, New York City had surpassed London, reaching a population of 7.7 million within its urban area. Meanwhile, in Japan, Tokyo was recovering from the damages of World War II and experienced rapid growths after it had been rebuilt. Around the year 1965, with an urban population of around 15 million, Tokyo took the top spot.
Amazing how Japan bounced back from the deaths from World War II, and how economically and population-wise they bounced back so much.
1975, that number was 20 million, and by the year 2000, Tokyo remained on top with 26 million. In the years since, however, a lot has changed. The world has been urbanizing like never before, and cities that have been minuscule on the world stage for so long have exploded in population. In particular, cities in places like China, India, and Africa are seeing rapid growth today. Cities have gotten so big that at this point, measuring how big a city is depends on what you want to define as part of the city. Today, we use 3 different measurements for this purpose alone. The first way is by counting the city proper, which includes all the area a city administers, but nothing out of their control. This means areas like suburbs or any other densely populated lands around a city do not count. If this definition is used, the city of Chongqing in China would come out on top with an astounding 30 million inhabitants. However, a lot of people disagree with this metric because Chongqing administers this entire area, which totals...
The Industrial Revolution is a big part of this because the Industrial Revolution created suburbia, meaning you don't have to live in the city or right by the place that you do your work, right? You can now take trains, you can take cars. So city density isn't as important as it once was now that travel is cheap. And again, you don't need to live right there. You can commute. So suburbia has definitely, like, and that's kind of what they're, I think, getting into, is now a big part of urbanization, right? Because it's not the city proper. You don't have to live in the city you work in.
82,000 square kilometers, which is similar in size to the entire United Arab Emirates, Austria, or the state of South Carolina. And not all of this is exactly what most would consider an urban environment.
Sure.
So then other people prefer to use the metropolitan area definition
instead, that's a better
which
one.
includes the major business zones as well as the primary commuter areas, though some of which may not be administered by the city itself.
Yeah, because if you look at the metropolitan area, you are looking at an area where it's connected, right? Just because you don't live in the city doesn't mean you're not connected to that city. So everything in that metropolitan area is most people are staying in there on a consistent daily basis. So that's probably a better term now than just city.
With this definition, we can see that Tokyo maintains the title as the world's
By
largest
far.
city, with an impressive 38 million inhabitants in an area of only a little over 2,000 square kilometers. But there's a final way to measure, and that's by counting all the continuous urban area, despite whether or not it technically belongs or even behaves with a city. And well, actually, Tokyo still comes out on top with 36 million people, but as you can see, other cities further down the line have been rearranged. In my opinion, either of these second two options are better, and I think it's safe to say that Tokyo remains the biggest city on the planet, with anywhere between 36 and 38 million people living inside it. But this won't last forever. Currently, the entire country of Japan is experiencing a decreasing population.
Interesting.
By 2025, Tokyo is expected to hold on to the title, but we can see 3 new Indian cities making it to the top 10 list, and this is indicative of a trend to come. Currently, China is experiencing a huge move towards urbanization, but sometime in the next few years, India is expected to surpass China in total population, and soon the country will start to experience a similar surge in urbanization. By 2050, it's projected that 6 cities will have overtaken Tokyo, with Mumbai in India possibly becoming the new biggest city on Earth, with 42 million inhabitants. But this will likely be short-lived. Remember how I said India is on the verge of a mass urbanization movement? Well, Africa is only slightly behind them, on the verge of being on the verge of a mass urbanization.
It's like Africa has the most long-term potential. India's got the short-term potential. Africa maybe have the long-term potential because that place is so, it gets devastated so much by certain economic and disease kind of ailments that is constantly hurt their population. But as we progress further and those issues become fewer, yeah, you could see how it's way more potential.
By 2075, Africa's total population is expected to reach over 3.5 billion people, roughly 3 times what it is today. And many of these people will be born to African cities. The biggest of them all is projected to be Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, with an estimated 58 million people.
I'd like to know why they're specifically.
But like Mumbai, Kinshasa's time on top is expected to be short-lived as well. By 2100, Africa will have continued to urbanize, and 4 of the top 10 largest cities are predicted to be in Africa, with Lagos, Nigeria ahead of the rest with an estimated 88 million people. Beyond this time frame, it's pretty difficult to predict, as so many things can happen in that time, so this is where we're going to have to stop, but I still find it extremely interesting to think about. If you enjoy thinking about these things with me, then maybe you would also enjoy donating to my Patreon like these guys have.
Definitely do.
You get to be a part of the growing population that supports me, and it really helps me continue making these videos. Obviously, you don't have to, which makes it all the better when people do, so thank you to my patrons. I couldn't do this without you. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, how about giving it a like? And if you're not already subscribed, well, I just think you really should. If you haven't already, you should also check out the first part of this 2-part series, where I talk about the earliest cities to hold this title. Other than that, thanks for watching.
Awesome. I really loved the future projections there, to see where that is going, especially now when you're getting to 1 and 2 generations ahead. And Didn't necessarily go into the reasons why that's going to be, but that was just when I was talking about Africa there. My idea about it is, again, if the things, because Africa of all the continents has one of the shorter lifespans of people because of, unfortunately, war, disease that has plagued that. And once modernization can overcome some of those things, then yeah, you have this incredible potential out there. And that definitely makes sense there with that going on with that. So, well, awesome. It was cool to see them kind of go through. You know, they picked up with Rome, and hopefully you were able to hear why I was saying that. You know, why Rome was able to be big that way from the technological perspective. And then you saw the historical events that affected the growth of these other ones, why Baghdad is going to get decreased because of the Mongol invasion, and why China is going to increase later on because of new stable empires coming through. And so able to see that, because again, I always talk about how geography and history, human history, obviously, or human geography, is so intertwined with histories there. So a lot of stuff I think I'm going to be able to take into my classrooms and get that, because I think it's a fascinating topic for anybody to really get into. So I'm excited to do that more. Like I said, got a Patreon account over there at Atlas Pro, so definitely check that out and give it a review, like, subscribe, all that. The original link is down below with that. And again, got some new history-related merch you might want to check out. Check out the Teespring link down below, and you can see what we got over there, and link to some other fun stuff over there too. All right, with that, we will go ahead and end it here, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.